The House at the End of the Banana Grove. A fictional horror story written in a style that feels like personal experience. Some houses are avoided because they are old. Others are avoided because no one wants to remember what happened inside them. In a remote village in the province of Quezon, Philippines, there was a place that the elderly rarely spoke about. It wasn't marked on any map. No road sign pointed travelers toward it, and no tourist had ever listed it among the places worth visiting. Yet if you asked the oldest residents about the house at the end of the banana grove, their expressions would change. Some would pretend they hadn't heard you, others would quietly walk away, and a few would lower their voices and whisper, "Never go there after sunset." In the summer of 2019, 27-year-old photographer Marco traveled to the village to produce a documentary about abandoned ancestral homes hidden across the countryside. He had always believed that every forgotten building carried a story. What he didn't know was that some stories never wanted to be told. The village was unusually quiet when Marco stepped off the bus. Even in the middle of the afternoon, only a handful of people wandered the narrow roads. While eating at a small roadside eatery, his eyes drifted toward an old black and white photograph hanging on the wall. It showed a large wooden house, surrounded by towering banana trees. He turned to the elderly owner. "Sir, does that house still exist?" The old man's smile slowly disappeared. "What house?" Marco pointed at the picture. "The one in the photograph." The old man sighed deeply. "You'd be better off forgetting it." "Why?" "Because not everyone who goes there comes back." Marco laughed politely. He assumed it was just another local ghost story used to frighten curious visitors. He had no idea the old man had spoken the truth. Late that afternoon, a tricycle driver agreed to take Marco to the edge of the village. The farther they traveled, the thicker the banana grove became. The sunlight slowly disappeared beneath the enormous leaves. Then, Marco noticed something strange. His phone had completely lost its signal. A few minutes later, the driver stopped. "This is as far as I go." Marco looked ahead. "But the house is farther down the road." The driver refused to look in that direction. "I don't go past this point. You'll have to walk." Before Marco could ask another question, the tricycle sped away, leaving him alone. The silence that followed felt unnatural. No birds, no insects, no wind. It was as if the entire forest had stopped breathing. Marco adjusted his backpack and continued on foot. The narrow dirt path twisted deeper into the grove. The banana trees stood impossibly close together. Their enormous leaves blocked almost every trace of daylight. As he walked, he heard footsteps behind him. He stopped. The footsteps stopped too. He continued walking. This time, there were two sets of footsteps. He spun around. Nothing. Only endless rows of banana trees. Then one of the leaves slowly moved, as if someone had just hidden behind it. Several minutes later, he finally saw the house. It stood alone at the end of the grove. A massive two-story wooden house. Its walls were covered with moss. Parts of the roof had collapsed. The windows were dark, except for one. On the second floor, a warm yellow light glowed behind a single window. Marco frowned. Someone still lives here? There was no smoke rising from the chimney. No vehicle outside. No footprints leading to the entrance. Nothing. And yet, there was light. He raised his camera and began taking photographs. Click, click, click. As he reviewed one of the images, his blood ran cold. Standing at the second floor window was a woman dressed entirely in white. Her long black hair covered her face. She stood perfectly still. Marco immediately looked up. The window was empty. He looked back at his camera. The woman had disappeared. He forced himself to smile. Just a trick of the light. But deep inside, something felt terribly wrong. The front door creaked open with almost no effort. The moment he stepped inside, an icy breeze swept through the house. The air smelled of damp wood, dust, and something else. Rotting bananas. The furniture was ancient. Broken chairs, collapsed cabinets, family portraits hung crookedly on the walls. But every face had been violently scratched away. Not one remained untouched. It was as if someone wanted every memory erased. As Marco explored the living room, a child's laughter echoed somewhere upstairs. Soft, playful. He froze. Silence. Then, the laughter came again. Closer this time. Behind him. He turned instantly. No one. Only an old wooden rocking chair. Slowly, gently, rocking by itself. Back and forth. Back and forth. As though someone had just stood up. Suddenly, his camera beeped. Low battery. Marco frowned. He had charged it completely before leaving town. Seconds later, the screen went black. Dead. At that exact moment, the faint yellow light upstairs disappeared. Darkness swallowed the second floor. The house became painfully quiet. Then, he heard it. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy footsteps coming from upstairs. Someone was walking slowly toward the staircase. Each step echoed through the house. Closer, 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 until the footsteps stopped. On the final stair, Marco held his breath. The silence lasted only a second. Then a cold whisper brushed against his right ear. "Why did you come back?" Marco gasped and stumbled away. There was no one beside him. No shadow, no figure, nothing. Then he looked down. Fresh, muddy footprints were appearing on the wooden floor, one after another, as though an invisible person was walking directly toward him. And in that horrifying moment, Marco realized he was no longer alone inside the house. Marco couldn't move. He stared at the fresh, muddy footprints slowly appearing across the old wooden floor. One, then another, then another. Each footprint formed by itself, pressing into the dust as though an invisible person was walking toward him. No feet, no shadow, only footprints. Step, step, step. Each one a little closer than the last. Marco slowly backed away. The footprints stopped. His breathing stopped with them. The entire house fell into absolute silence. Then, crack! Something heavy slammed into the floor upstairs. A split second later, dozens of footsteps erupted above him. Not one person, not two, hundreds. Children laughing, women crying, old men gasping for breath. The sounds raced across the ceiling, as though an entire crowd was running overhead. Then, beneath all the noise, a deep voice whispered from somewhere inside the walls. "Don't go outside." Marco gripped his dead camera tighter. His heart pounded so violently he could hear it echoing inside his ears. The footsteps stopped all at once. Silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It felt like something was waiting. "I have to get out." He turned toward the front door. His blood froze. The door was gone. In its place stood nothing but a solid wooden wall. Marco rushed toward it. He slammed both hands against the wood. Solid. No handle, no hinges, no doorway. Impossible. He ran through every room. Every window had been boarded shut from the inside. Only minutes ago, he had clearly seen sunlight pouring through them. Now, it was as though they had never existed. Then, a bell rang. Ding! A single rusted bell. soft, distant. It seemed to come from somewhere behind the house. Marco followed the sound. Near the rear of the property stood a tiny shed, almost completely hidden by overgrown weeds. Hanging from a wooden beam was an old bronze bell. It swayed gently, back and forth, but there was no wind. Beneath it, he noticed a shallow pit in the ground, and beside the pit, dozens of pairs of shoes. Children's sandals, women's slippers, men's work boots, covered in dirt, covered in moss, as if people had removed their shoes and never returned to wear them again. Marco pulled out his phone. Its battery had somehow dropped to 12%. He quickly opened the camera. The moment he did, his gallery refreshed by itself. A photograph appeared, one he had never taken. It showed the house, standing exactly where he was now. But there were people gathered outside, dozens of them. Men, women, children, every one of them smiling directly at the camera. Marco zoomed in. His stomach twisted. None of them had eyes, only empty black sockets. Then he noticed someone standing at the center of the group. A young man, wearing the exact same clothes Marco was wearing now. The same backpack, the same camera around his neck. His head hung forward unnaturally, like a corpse. His phone vibrated. Incoming call. The caller ID read only one word: unknown. No, it didn't say unknown. It simply said nothing. Hands trembling, Marco answered. Silence. Only slow breathing. Deep, wet, patient. Then whisper. Look behind you. Marco slowly turned. No one. The shed was empty. The bell had stopped moving. He exhaled shakily. Then he glanced back at his phone. Reflected on the black screen, an old woman stood directly behind him. Her skin hung loosely from her face. Her cloudy white eyes stared straight into his own. Marco spun around. Nothing. She was gone. Night arrived faster than it should have. Within minutes, the grove was swallowed by darkness. Marco hurried down the dirt path, desperate to leave. He walked for nearly 15 minutes. Then he stopped. The old house stood in front of him. Again. Confused, he turned around and tried another direction. 20 minutes later, he arrived back at the same house. Again. A third attempt. The same result. No matter which path he chose, the banana grove always led him back, as though the forest itself refused to let him escape. Then he heard them. Whispers. Hundreds of whispers. At first they blended together. Soft. Unintelligible. But gradually, the voices became clearer. A new one. He's here. He's the replacement. Marco backed away. His flashlight swept across the grove. His breath caught in his throat. People, standing silently between the banana trees. Dozens, then hundreds. Men, women, children, all dressed in white. Their pale faces expressionless. None of them blinked. None of them breathed. They simply watched him, without moving, without speaking. The longer he stared, the more of them appeared, as if the darkness itself was creating them. Suddenly, every one of them bowed their heads. At exactly the same moment, the forest fell silent. Something was approaching. THUD. A single heavy footstep. The ground trembled. Thud. Another. The banana leaves bent downward, as though something unimaginably massive was walking beneath them. Yet Marco saw nothing. Only the leaves sinking beneath invisible weight. Closer, 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 until whatever it was stopped directly in front of him. A freezing breath washed across his face. Then a voice, far deeper than any human voice could ever be. "Why did you wake the house?" Marco couldn't answer. His entire body refused to move. Then, two icy hands settled gently onto his shoulders. He hadn't seen anyone approach. He couldn't feel a body, only those hands. A terrible smell filled the air. Rotting flesh, wet soil, decay. Something leaned close to his ear and whispered a single name. "Find Isco." The moment the name was spoken, every figure in the grove slowly raised their heads. Then, they smiled, their mouths stretched impossibly wide, from one ear to the other, and in one perfectly synchronized voice, they spoke, "You will never leave." Marco's legs refused to move. The hundreds of pale figures standing among the banana trees remained perfectly still, their unnaturally wide smiles frozen across their faces. The cold hands resting on his shoulders suddenly vanished. The whisper stopped. The forest became deathly silent once more. Then, in the blink of an eye, the figures were gone. Every single one of them. Marco found himself standing once again in front of the old house, as if he had never left, as if the grove itself had folded around him. He looked at his wristwatch. 7 p.m. The same time it had been nearly an hour ago. Time had stopped. Or perhaps, time obeyed different rules inside the grove. There was no escape. Not yet. If the invisible voice wanted him to find someone named Isco, then perhaps that was his only chance of surviving. Marco stepped back inside the house. The floorboards groaned beneath every step. The air had grown colder. The smell of rotten bananas was stronger now, mixing with another odor, old blood. As he searched the living room, something caught his attention. A tall wooden wardrobe stood against the wall. He was certain it had been completely closed earlier. Now, its door was slightly open, just enough to reveal darkness inside. Marco swallowed hard and pulled it open. Inside were old clothes covered in dust, family photographs, a rusted lantern, and a small wooden box. It was locked. The moment Marco touched it, click, the lock released by itself. Inside the box lay a worn leather notebook. Its pages were yellow with age. The cover bore a faded inscription, "Isco's Journal, 1964. Marco carefully opened it. The first entries were ordinary. A young man writing about life in the countryside, fishing in the river, helping his parents tend the fields, playing guitar beneath the moonlight. He even wrote about the peaceful banana grove surrounding their home. But as Marco continued reading, the handwriting changed. It became shaky, uneven, desperate. "I hear footsteps every night. Something walks between the banana trees. It is not a person. At midnight, it calls someone's name." Marco turned another page. The writing had become almost unreadable. "I saw it tonight. It has no face, but somehow it smiled at me." His heartbeat quickened. He turned another page. Dark brown stains covered the paper. Blood. The final words were barely legible. "Father warned us never to answer voices outside. Tonight I heard Mother's voice calling for help. I ran outside." The sentence ended abruptly. Only a long scratch remained across the page. At the bottom, 5 trembling words. It wasn't Mother at all. Marco slowly lowered the notebook. Something wet landed on his hand. Drip, another drop, then another. He looked down. Dark red liquid. Blood. His breathing became shallow. Very slowly, he raised his flashlight toward the ceiling. His body froze. Hundreds of bloody handprints covered the wooden beams overhead. some large, some tiny, as though countless people had clawed desperately at the ceiling, trying to escape, trying to hold on, trying not to be dragged away. Creak. A door upstairs slowly opened. A soft giggle echoed through the hallway. A child's voice, barely louder than a whisper. Brother. Marco looked toward the staircase. A little girl stood at the top. She couldn't have been older than 7. She wore a faded white dress. Her long black hair dripped with water. She stood perfectly still, head lowered. Are you Isco's sister? Marco asked softly. The little girl slowly raised her face. Marco nearly screamed. Her eye sockets were completely empty. Dark holes stared back at him. From those empty sockets, tiny white worms slowly crawled down her cheeks. She smiled, then silently pointed toward the kitchen, toward the floor. Behind the old kitchen table, Marco noticed something he had somehow missed before. A small wooden trapdoor, hidden beneath a torn rug. He pulled it open. A wave of unbearable stench rushed upward. Rotting flesh, wet earth, something ancient. A narrow staircase disappeared into darkness. Marco switched on his phone's flashlight. Only 8% battery remained. He began descending. Each step echoed strangely. Splash, splash, splash. His shoes weren't landing on wood anymore. They sank into thick mud. He aimed the light downward. His blood turned to ice. The mud wasn't just mud. Human bones lay buried beneath it. Skulls, ribs, hands, legs, thousands of bones, stretching farther than his flashlight could reach. At the bottom of the staircase, the darkness opened into an enormous underground cavern. This wasn't a basement. It was far too vast. Its ceiling disappeared into darkness. The air was warm, humid. Breathing felt difficult. Then Marco saw it. Standing in the center of the cavern was the largest banana tree he had ever imagined. Its trunk was black, not dark brown, not burned, black. Its bark looked almost like dried human skin. The roots twisted through the ground like giant veins. But it wasn't the tree itself that made Marco stop breathing. It was its fruit. Bodies. Human bodies. Hundreds of them, hanging from the branches. Old, young, children, women, men, completely dried out, suspended like grotesque fruit waiting to ripen. At the foot of the tree sat a skeleton. It leaned against the trunk. A weathered guitar rested across its lap. Beside it lay another notebook, exactly like the one Marco held. A small wooden cross had been placed in front of the remains. The faded carving read, Isco della Cruz, 1946, 1964. Marco slowly knelt. I'm sorry. The skeleton's head moved. Its empty jaw slowly lifted. Then, its eyes opened. Not hollow sockets. Real eyes. Deep crimson. Still alive. They locked onto Marco. The skeleton's mouth slowly stretched open, far wider than any human jaw should. Inside, tiny human hands reached outward. Dozens of them. Children's hands, adult hands, all clawing desperately toward the outside, crying, begging, screaming without sound. Then, in one agonized voice, they whispered, "Don't vacate." Before Marco could react, the entire cavern shook. A deafening roar thundered beneath the earth. The enormous black banana tree trembled violently. Every hanging corpse slowly opened its eyes. One, then another, then another. Hundreds of lifeless eyes stared directly at him. From somewhere behind the tree, a colossal shadow began to rise. It grew taller and taller until its head disappeared into the darkness above. Marco couldn't yet see what it was, only its impossible size. Then he heard it breathe, a single breath, slow, heavy, ancient, and in that moment, Marco understood that there were things in this world that humanity was never meant to find. The underground cavern trembled as though the earth itself had begun to breathe. Dust rained from the ceiling. The twisted roots of the enormous black banana tree writhed like living serpents, crawling slowly through the sea of human bones beneath Marco's feet. Every corpse hanging from the branches had opened its eyes. Some stared silently. Others moved their lips without making a sound. A few wept black tears that fell into the mud below. Then, the colossal shadow behind the tree took its first step. T-H-U-D. The cavern shook violently. Thousands of bones rattled across the ground. Another step. T-H-U-D. The air grew heavier. Marco struggled to breathe. Another. T-H-U-D. The shadow finally emerged from behind the tree, and Marco saw it. It was not a man, nor was it any animal that had ever walked the earth. It towered nearly 15 feet tall. Its body appeared to be stitched together from countless dried human corpses. Its arms were unnaturally long, hanging almost to the ground. Each finger ended in curved black claws that looked sharp enough to tear through stone. But its face, it had no face, no eyes, no nose, no ears, only smooth, pale flesh, except for one horrifying feature, a mouth. One enormous mouth stretched vertically down the center of its head. From forehead to chin, it slowly opened. Inside were thousands of jagged teeth, and between those teeth, human hands reached outward. Tiny hands, adult hands, old hands. They pushed desperately through the creature's mouth as though trapped souls were trying to escape. Some cried, some clawed at the air. Then, one by one, the creature swallowed them back inside itself. The screaming stopped. Silence returned. Marco staggered backward. The skeleton beneath the tree spoke. Its jaw never moved, yet its voice echoed clearly throughout the cavern. I've been here for 62 years. I thought the house was haunted. A pause. But the house is alive. Marco stared at Isco. What do you mean? Dark blood slowly flowed from the skeleton's crimson eyes. The house wasn't built on top of the banana grove. It was built to imprison this thing. Long before the village existed, the land had been untouched wilderness. At its center stood a single banana tree unlike any other. It never bore fruit. Instead, people disappeared. Hunters, travelers, children, anyone who wandered too close. Days later, a new body would be found hanging from its branches, as if the tree itself had grown another victim. When Spanish missionaries arrived centuries ago, they tried to destroy it. For 3 nights they burned the grove. They prayed. They blessed the ground. They buried sacred relics beneath the roots. Yet every morning, the tree stood taller than before, stronger, hungrier. Finally, they made a desperate decision. Instead of destroying it, they would imprison it. They built a great wooden house directly above the tree. Its beams were carved with prayers, its foundations sealed with ancient rites. For generations, one family remained behind to guard the prison, to make sure nothing beneath the house ever escaped. Isco whispered, I was the last keeper until you arrived. Marco frowned. The last keeper? Isco nodded slowly. Every few decades, it demands another, a keeper. If no one stays, it will leave the grove. The enormous creature lifted its head. Its giant mouth slowly widened. The cavern grew darker. Marco's flashlight flickered. Once, twice, then darkness. Complete darkness. Only the sound of breathing remained. Not one breath. Hundreds. As though hundreds of people were breathing from inside the creature's body. Each inhale carried whispers. Each exhale carried screams. Something cold grabbed Marco's wrist. He almost cried out. It was Isco. His skeletal fingers were icy. There is one way. Isco whispered. The tree has a heart. Burn it. Marco looked toward the trunk. For the first time, he noticed a faint red glow pulsing beneath its black bark, like a heartbeat. But if you burn it, Isco continued, the keeper burns with it. You cannot escape. A life must pay for every life it has taken. Before Marco could answer, a deafening scream erupted from every branch of the tree. The hanging corpses began to convulse violently. Their dried bodies twisted, their heads snapped upright. Then, crack! The vines wrapped around their necks broke. One by one, they fell. T-H-U-D, Tatwadoi. H-U-D. Hundreds of bodies struck the cavern floor. For several long seconds, none of them moved. Then, slowly, the first corpse stood, its neck bent completely backward. Its arms hung at impossible angles. Another rose, then another. Some had no faces, some had no lower jaws. Others were missing entire sections of their bodies. Yet they all began walking toward Marco. Their footsteps echoed together, soft, slow, unstoppable. As they surrounded him, they spoke in perfect unison. Thank you for coming. Now we can go home. You will stay. You will become the next keeper. Marco ran. He slipped across piles of bones. The roots reached after him. The creature's footsteps thundered behind him. Thud. The entire cavern shook. T-H-U-D. A chorus of voices echoed from its mouth. Hundreds of missing people crying out at once. Marco spotted the staircase leading back into the house. Hope. He sprinted toward it, ignoring the corpses grabbing at his clothes, ignoring the roots wrapping around his ankles, ignoring the monstrous breathing behind him. He climbed. Faster, faster, until he burst through the trapdoor, panting, desperate, alive. But the house was no longer abandoned. Warm lights glowed from every room. The furniture looked new. Fresh food covered the dining table. Children laughed happily. A radio played soft music in the corner. A woman smiled warmly. Marco, we've been waiting for you. For a brief moment, everything looked perfectly normal, comforting, safe. Then Marco noticed something impossible. No one cast a shadow. Not a single one. The room slowly grew silent. Every face turned toward him, smiling. The smiles widened and widened until the corners of their mouths tore open to their ears. Black roots spilled from inside their mouths. Thin, twisting, alive. They slithered across the wooden floor toward Marco's feet. The black roots crept silently across the wooden floor, slowly, patiently, like snakes stalking wounded prey. Marco stepped backward. The roots continued forward. Another step, then another, until one of them brushed against the tip of his boot. Instantly, Dozens more burst through the cracks between the floorboards. They wrapped around his ankles. Cold, slimy, alive. Marco struggled to pull free, but the roots tightened with incredible strength. Beneath his feet, the floor softened. The old wooden planks dissolved into layers of dead banana leaves. Hidden beneath them, human hands emerged from the darkness. Thin hands, broken hands, children's hands. They reached upward, grabbing at his legs, desperately pulling him down. Not out of anger, but out of despair, as though they were begging him not to leave them behind. The smiling family remained seated around the dining table. None of them blinked. None of them breathed. Then the woman at the head of the table slowly stood. She wore the same white dress Marco had seen in the upstairs window when he first arrived. Now he could clearly see her face. It was pale as bone. Deep scars crossed her cheeks, and inside every scar, tiny mouths slowly opened. Each mouth whispered in a different voice. Some belonged to children, others sounded ancient. Together they formed a single sentence. We've been waiting for you, Marco. Your blood is the key. Marco stared at her in disbelief. What are you talking about? The woman did not answer. Instead, she reached beneath the table and lifted an old cracked mirror. Its silver frame was black with age. She held it toward him. Look. Marco hesitated, then slowly looked into the mirror. He did not see his own reflection. Instead, he saw a little boy, no older than 10, standing outside this very house. Beside him stood a smiling man and woman, his parents. The three of them laughed together beneath the shade of the banana trees. The image shimmered, darkened. Rain began to fall. Night covered the grove. The little boy cried as an elderly man carried him away from the burning house. Behind them, the banana grove was engulfed in flames. Within the fire, a gigantic shadow slowly rose toward the sky. The woman spoke softly. You were born here. You are the last child of the family that guarded this place. Your grandfather carried you away before the house claimed you. He wanted to end your family's curse. She stepped closer, but the house never forgets. It remembers every drop of blood. No matter how many years pass, it always calls its keeper home. Memories Marco had buried long ago suddenly returned. His grandfather, the old man who had raised him. Every full moon, he lit candles throughout their home. Every night before bed, he repeated the same warning. If someone calls your name after midnight, never answer. Marco had laughed at the superstition as a child. Now he finally understood. It had never been a superstition. It had been a warning. The walls began to move. At first, Marco thought it was another illusion. Then he realized the house was breathing. The walls expanded, then contracted, like the chest of a living creature. The ceiling groaned. The floor trembled. A deafening heartbeat echoed through every room. Thump, thump, thump. Suddenly, the floor split open. The monstrous entity from beneath the grove slowly emerged into the house. It seemed even larger now. Faces pushed through its skin. Men, women, children. Their expressions twisted in agony. Each face cried for only a moment before sinking back into the creature's flesh, as if they were drowning inside it. The monster stopped directly before Marco. Its enormous mouth slowly opened. Instead of a roar, a familiar voice emerged. His grandfather's voice. Marco, we're all inside. Your parents, Isco, every keeper. We are all here. A long silence followed. Then one final plea. Do not save us. End this. Something slid across the floor. An old kerosene lantern. Beside it, a small box of matches. Marco stared at them. He remembered Isco's final words. The tree has a heart. Burn it. The center of the living room suddenly collapsed. The gigantic black banana tree burst through the floor. Its roots shattered the walls. Its branches pierced the roof. The house shook violently. The tree's trunk pulsed like living flesh. Then Marco saw it. Embedded deep within the trunk, a massive black heart. It beat slowly. Thump. The house screamed. Thump. The faces trapped within the bark cried out. Missing children, old villagers, travelers who had vanished without a trace. Every soul imprisoned inside the tree turned toward Marco, waiting, hoping, praying. Marco struck a match. A tiny flame flickered to life, so small, so fragile, yet he knew it carried the power to end centuries of horror. He also knew the price. If the heart burned, the keeper would burn with it. There would be no escape, no future, no second chance. He thought of his grandfather, of Isco, of every innocent life stolen by the grove. If he walked away now, someone else would one day hear their name whispered among the banana trees. Someone else would become the next keeper. Marco smiled sadly. I won't let that happen. He raised the lantern, smashed it against the trunk. Oil soaked the black bark. He lowered the burning match. For one final moment, everything became silent. Then, the flame touched the heart. The scream that followed did not belong to the monster. It belonged to thousands of souls crying out at once. The tree erupted into black fire. The house shook violently. Walls split apart. The creature writhed in unbearable agony. Faces burst from its flesh, no longer screaming in pain, but smiling, at peace. One by one, they dissolved into glowing lights that drifted upward through the collapsing roof like countless stars. Marco looked up. Among them, he saw Isco, young again, holding his guitar. He smiled, then disappeared. Beside him stood Marco's grandfather, his parents, the little girl from the staircase, all of them free at last. His grandfather nodded proudly, then faded into the light. The fire consumed everything. The house, the tree, the roots, the monster. Marco closed his eyes. The heat surrounded him, yet he felt no fear, only peace. The last thing he heard was the wind moving gently through the banana leaves. Then, silence. 5 years later, the land where the banana grove once stood had become an empty field. No banana trees ever grew there again. The villagers eventually rebuilt the road that had been abandoned for generations. Children played where no one had dared to walk before. People believed the nightmare had finally ended, until one rainy evening, a traveling truck driver stopped at a roadside diner nearly 50 miles away. He asked the elderly owner a simple question. I got lost on an old dirt road. There was a strange wooden house at the end of a banana grove. The old man slowly lowered his coffee cup. His face turned pale. What did you say? The house. It looked abandoned, but I swear, there was a light in one of the upstairs windows. The old man's hands began to tremble. He whispered the same warning that had echoed through generations. If you ever find that house again, do not answer if it calls your name, because some prisons are never truly destroyed. Sometimes, they simply find another place to stand. The end. Or is it?